coming to Canada, I couldn't really eat the food here. I brought in a number of food from Nigeria, but because my church community most times will have different kind of parties or different kind of get-togethers, I would always go with my, I call them my saving bowls. You know, they were the ones that, those bowls saved me throughout my journey here, because I would go to my church community after the parties, you know, if there was still leftover food, like things that people, and they were looking for people that would take them, I was ready with my bowls and I would take them. And that was how I started using those meals actually for survival here. Hello, my name is Wale Agboola. I'm typically called Wale. Wale is derived from my middle name, Olawale, so everybody calls me Wale. By profession, I'm an industrial network and security engineer. For fun, I play the drums, so I'm always playing the drums every weekend, almost every weekend in church. I'm also a real estate investor. That's one of the things I also do on the side. And that's a quick summary about myself. I'm a Nigerian and I'm also a Canadian. I came to Canada in 2015, August of 2015, and my journey here, coming to Canada as an international student, was quite interesting. It started back from, I was in the NYC program. Now I'll explain that. So after I did my undergraduate back in Nigeria, and I was going to come to Canada for my master's degree. There is this program that we typically do in Nigeria. It's a mandatory program for every graduate. It's called the National Youth Service Corps, NYC for short. And every student that graduates from school has to go do it. So what it is essentially is you leave the part of country that you were raised or you schooled, and you go to another part of the country for some sort of community service, right? And I was posted to this other side of the country to do not so much away from where I was raised, but it was definitely a new experience for me. And looking at the NYC program, typically everybody after the NYC program would need to decide on what they want to do after. So it's either you go do your master's degree, you further your education, or you just get into the workforce. And for me, I knew I wanted to further my education, but I wasn't so clear on what exactly it was going to look like. I have a sibling who had been in the UK for many years. So he did his undergraduate in the UK. He did his master's in the UK. He's currently doing his PhD in the UK. And it was very natural that I was just going to go to the UK. That was like the very clear pathway for me. But for some reason, I didn't like the UK. I didn't want to go to the UK. They didn't really have good policies at that time for international students. And then during this NYC program, this was still during my NYC program, I was living with a couple of people, and I had one guy that I was living with who we went to the same school, Covenant University, together. And he mentioned that he was already looking into Canada, and he was, trying to apply for a computer engineering master's program in the University of Alberta. So that piqued my interest, because also for me, what I wanted to do actually was a mixture of engineering and then IT, information technology. So I needed to look for something that would give me both, sort of. And then I started looking into Canada. I looked into the university, the U of A, that he had mentioned to me. And then I found this program, seemed like what I was looking for. So I went ahead, applied for it, and then I got the admission for that, actually. The interesting thing is this person who introduced me to the U of A didn't get the admission. Fortunately, he's a popular celebrity singer in Nigeria right now, so it worked out well for him. And then that was how that started. So after I got my admission, now I needed to apply for the study permit, which again, I didn't have any help from anywhere. I was going to have to do it by myself. I reached out to a friend that was already in Canada at that time. He was already like a year in school in Canada. So he kind of just gave me a quick summary of how the system works, what I needed to do. And then I had to go do all my research myself. Had to get all the documents, do all the application. I had a friend who helped me a little bit with the letter of intent, because that was a major one, writing. She was very good at writing, so she kind of helped me put it together very well. And then, of course, I submitted the application, and I did get the approval to come to Canada. So of course that was an exciting news for me. I now knew I was coming to Canada, a place where I had no one. Essentially, it was going to be my second time outside of the country. The first time I left the country was in 2009, and I went to the UK to visit my brother. So since then I had not traveled, and then this was going to be my first time going to the other side of the world just by myself. My dad had made a comment at some point, do you know Canada is very cold? I'm like, well, there's a slang in Nigeria that we call we go rough am. It essentially means we would put everything that we have into it. So that was my mindset at that point, that we go rough am. So an interesting thing happened when I was then trying to book my tickets for flights. I had booked this cheap ticket in my mind because every other ticket was just too expensive. So I booked this cheap one, and then I was getting ready to come to Canada. And then 2 weeks before I was going to travel, I got an email from the airline asking me if I had a US transit visa or a US visa. I'm like, what do you mean by that? I didn't realize that you actually needed a US visa or a transit visa to actually go through the US. And then that changed everything. This was 2 weeks till I was going to travel. So I had to figure out a way to get a refund for that ticket and then book another ticket within 2 weeks before traveling. So fortunately, I was able to get another ticket. And then at that point, I understood why the other tickets were pretty expensive. And then that's how that went. On the day of my travel, another interesting thing happened. So I'd gone to the airport, done all my check-ins and everything, ready to fly. But then I still wanted to spend time with my family. By the way, I had a girlfriend at that time, so she also came to the airport to see me off. So after I had, my family had said all their goodbyes, they left, thinking that I was supposed to go back into the airport to go to the gate, right? But then I decided to spend more time with my girlfriend outside of the airport, just chatting and all of that. And like they say, love, when you're in love, sometimes time runs. You don't realize that time is going. So for some reason, I lost track of time. And by the time I was going to get back into the airport and I got to the gate, there was a very long queue at the gate. And it dawned on me that I was going to miss my flight. And there was no way I could call my parents to say, we have to book a new ticket. So I knew that was the end for me, essentially. So I had to get courage. I had to give myself boldness from nowhere. So what I did was I just took my bag, my hand luggage bag, and I just started walking through the queue on the line. And before anybody could react, I was past them already on the queue. So I just started walking like as if I was a staff, essentially. So I got to a little bit to the front, and then someone actually noticed me just coming all the way through the lines, and then actually stopped me and said, "Where are you going to?" I'm like, "I'm late for my flight. I need to get to my flight." And they were like, "Show me your ticket first." And then I showed them, and they were like, okay, I can go. So that was how I got saved, essentially, at the airport. My parents don't even know about this until now. They don't know about this. So that was how I got to Canada. In the flight, actually, my flight experience was interesting because I met two Nigerians, of course, like elderly people. I had a chat with one of them on my way from Nigeria to Amsterdam. From Amsterdam to Toronto, I had a chat with another Nigerian. And that other person I had my chat with, actually we still talk to today. So that was actually my first relationship that I built. I built it on my way to Canada, and it's still a relationship that I've kept till today. So that's how my journey, went from Nigeria. Interestingly for me, I had been able to get a hold of somebody here in Edmonton from one of the popular rental advert sites. I've been able to get a hold of a Nigerian. He had given me an offer that I could stay with him for a week until I get my foot. So when I got to his place, fortunately for me, his roommate actually was going to move out. So it was very easy for me. I slept on the couch for about 2 weeks, and then I just moved into the room. So that was smooth for me on that front. So, and for school, really, one of the challenges I found myself in after I came into Edmonton was I couldn't spend any money. So I'd converted our currency back in Nigeria, which is Naira. I'd converted all of that to dollars, to Canadian dollars. And I just couldn't bring myself to spending I felt like I was committing a sin because even to buy like any little thing, I would convert it to the naira equivalent, and I'll be like, there's no way I'm spending this amount of naira on this little thing, even as small as juice. So I would take the juice. The juice was sweet because I would take some of my roommates to drink. And then at some point, he called me and sat me down and said, you know what? You would have to spend your money. So I was a little bit adamant until this experience. So my first experience with the snow here, I was going somewhere with the bus, and I was still a little bit confused with the bus system at that time. I missed my bus because of the snow. I didn't realize that when it snows, the roads are bad, and then there's traffic, and then your bus time is not exactly the bus time anymore. So I missed my bus somehow, and I had to wait outside for another 30 minutes. And that experience was one of my first bad experience that I had in Canada, because the shoes that I had were from Nigeria, because I was thinking we go rough them. But I realized that we couldn't rough it, in quotes. And then my legs were really frozen on that day. So after that day, I decided to just take the money and go buy proper shoes. So that was my first interesting experience there. For school, I realized quickly that I wasn't able to actually understand a lot of things. So the system is different. The educational system is a little bit different. Now, for some of my courses, they were easy for me because it was more of exactly what I was used to back in Nigeria, which was you memorize things, and then as long as you can remember them, you're fine. Here, I realized that some of my courses were really more of conceptual things. So there were no right, there were no wrong answers. It wasn't yes or no. It was more of whatever you pick, defend it. Essentially, that's what it was. So some of my courses I did very well. Some of the other conceptual ones I didn't do very well. And then even in class, my program was slightly different from a regular, like typical program, because my program was actually designed for working professionals. So it meant that the classes were held on Saturdays and Sundays, right? So for me, that was a little bit challenging as well, because I would be in school all day on Saturday, all day on Sunday, right? So it was a little bit challenging. And then in class, I was just sleeping because the lecturer is talking and I'm still trying to adjust to the tonation of what they're saying. Sometimes I can't really hear them. So for me, it was just boring, and I would just sleep off in class, really. But what I did to catch myself was I would put my phone on recording and just record the class. So that way, when I get back home, I was able to listen back to some of the lectures. So that was how I kind of walked through some of the courses initially when I got here in Edmonton. Yeah, so we have different cultures in Nigeria, and I speak Yoruba. That's the language I speak, which is one of the many cultures that we have, languages that we have in Nigeria. Also has its own culture, right? So we are very rich in culture in Nigeria. So for me, I've been brought up, I was brought up as a Yoruba child in the sense. So there were things, of course, that were very natural, very innate to me. And when I got to Canada, just because of my experiences with, I was able to get into I was able to start working almost like 3 months after I got in here. It was very challenging for me. So, and I'll explain that. So in Nigeria, for instance, in my culture, when an elder is talking to you, you don't look at them in the eyes. It's a sign of disrespect in the sense. So you are advised to look away or look down or something, right? But here, people actually want to have eye contact with you in the sense. So for me, that's super, again, like I didn't get how I should be looking at my elders in the eyes. That was one thing. The other thing for me was first name basis. So Canada people just call themselves, names. For me, because I was working in a professional environment, but I was referred by a Nigerian, an elderly person, from Nigeria, like that was in the community that I joined here. At work, it was very difficult for me to call the person by name. So there was no way that I was going to be calling this person by name. And I realized that the first time I went to the office, and I was trying to call him by the regular name that we would call an elderly person. He was like, "Oh no, this is a work environment. You can just you don't have to do that." But I'm like, my mind, I know I cannot. So I had to devise a way to integrate that, find a way to, especially when you're sending emails, right? Like, I mean, I had to find a way just around that to make sure that I'm not disrespecting you from our culture, and I'm also fine from a regular, like, culture here in the sense. So, of course, I had to grow into that. I had to, like, understand that I was in a different culture, understand that it's just a different place. Even in my church community, which was a major community that I joined, which was full of a lot of Nigerians, I realized that even there, like, people already kind of got used to the culture here in Edmonton or in Canada generally, which was, people can call each other by names. But for me, it was just a little bit tough. So I had to figure out when to use the names that show respect, and then when it's all vibes, right? And then you're just using other names, like call them by name. So I had to devise means of knowing when to switch and when not to switch. So that was a culture shock. I also realized that. So for instance, someone could ask you, do you want to do something? But actually, it's not a question. They're actually telling you to do it. So for instance, I can say, "Oh, do you want to help me with that brush?" And in my mind, I can be like, "No, I don't want to help you." But actually, they're telling you, bring the brush. So it was a little bit, exactly what are you saying? Is it bring the brush, or are you just asking me a question? So that was an interesting shock for me to just, I mean, I use that now, like I use it a lot now. So, but it was initially, that was a little bit, tough for me to kind of figure out. So getting into Edmonton, I was very fortunate that 3 months after I got into Edmonton, I was able to get a junior professional role, which was very, very rare at that time. I remember when I got into my church community, there was I think 2 weeks after that, someone had dropped me home, who happens to be one of my best friends right now. He had dropped me back home after, like, again, like I said, I used to play drums. So after a rehearsal, he had dropped me back home. And then we got talking. And then he had just finished his master's degree at that time in 2015. And he was looking for, a job at that time. And he kind of gave me a quick breakdown of how the system worked, especially from a career perspective. And as an international student, he shared some of the struggles that he's had. And that was very inspiring for me, because that conversation we had that night, I can remember it very vividly in his car. That kind of shaped how my journey through Canada went through, as an international student, and even, as a career person as well. So he had explained, and he had told me that I should just try as much as possible to, get some sort of work experience, however I'm able to do it. So I went in search for it. I found someone who was also doing what I wanted to do, in my church community. I spoke to the person, I was very eager to work, essentially. And I told the person one thing. I said, I don't even want to make any money. I don't need to be paid. I just want to work, essentially. Because I had done quite a number of certifications from back home when I was doing my undergraduate studies, but I hadn't really I didn't really work. So I just wanted to work anyways. And then 3 months after, I was able to go for an interview where he was working. They were looking for someone junior. And then I actually got a job. So I was working as a part-time student, because with your study permit, you can only do 20 hours of work when school is in session. So I had done that initially, and I got a job. I was making more than times two of what every other international student was making from all that kind of jobs that they were doing. So it was pretty good for me. So that was the first memorable experience I had, like, here as a student, because it was something that was very rare. Like, everybody who heard that, oh, I got this job, was like, wow, that's super, super impressive. It was something that was very rare. So that was a major, major experience for me. I was really happy that I had that experience, because that really shaped my journey here in Canada. So that was the first one. The second one I would say is when I actually got my first car as a student. So one thing happened with the other job, the first job I got. 3 months after I started working, there was the oil downturn and all of that. So I was told I was excused. I was excused to stop working for a bit and sort of just be there. And then during this, I remember during the summer of my first summer, I got a rubber paving job. Pretty much we use rubber to repair driveways, pavements, and all of those kind of things. So it was rubber and glue and all of that. So I did that for 4 months thereabout, and we were working tirelessly. Like we were working about 15 hours every day for that. So I made quite some money actually, and then I was able to buy my first car. So for me that was pretty sweet because I mean this was just a young guy coming from Nigeria with no bearing, and then this was me like 1 year into Canada. I was getting my first car, so that was pretty, that was an emotional thing for me as well at that time. So I would say those were like two major memorable experiences I had at that time. So for support systems, again, like I mentioned before, my program was a little bit different. So I wasn't in school when every other students, were in school. But fortunately, I had a Nigerian friend who was actually doing the same program. And then I had two Ghanaians actually that were in the same program. So naturally, like I get towards them. Interestingly, even the Nigerian students, we actually went to the same school back. We went to the same school back for our undergraduates, but I never knew her at that time. So they were the three people that I get towards initially. Of course, as we kept on going, I found some Indians, some particular Indian students that we kind of worked together. So we became study buddies. Those were like really the people that we could talk. Again, because on Saturday and Sundays was when I was having my classes. I couldn't really go to the church community during those days. So I had to fall back to them for pretty much many things. So we would go to school together, read together, do assignments together, and all of those kinds. So they were my major support at that time. The church community also was a major support for me because coming to Canada, I couldn't really eat the food here. I brought in a number of food from Nigeria, but because my church community most times will have different kind of parties or different kind of get-togethers, I would always go with my, I call them my saving bowls. They were the ones those bowls saved me throughout my journey here because I would go to my church community after the parties, if there was still leftover food, like things that people, and they were looking for people that would take them, I was ready with my bowls and I would take them. And that was how I started using those meals actually for survival here, really, just because my taste buds were still trying to adjust and it wasn't quick. So my church community really helped also because every time there was like a get together or every time there was a gathering, I was very excited to always go because I was missing out a lot on Saturdays and Sundays. So anytime I could get into my church community, I was always happy to go there. So I would say between those two things there, those were my major support systems here because in Canada, you just need to have people around you. So. Yeah, so for discrimination, really, nothing stands out very particular to me right now. And that was because, and it might have happened, but I just probably didn't pay any attention to it. However, um, I would say I had better experience because, I mean, I used to hear of, people, there's a regular, oh, why you speak good English? But I mean, we speak English in Nigeria, but that wasn't really a thing for me. The experience I had for that was, and I'm grateful to my director, my first director for this. When I was working at the junior role I talked about before, he had noticed that I was, a little timid. Actually, it was not a little, I was timid, to be frank. So, because it was my first time working and it was not even working in Nigeria, I was actually working abroad. So I was just, the culture was different, everything was different. So I was just pretty much timid at that point. So he had noticed that, and then he actually helped me come out of it. So he took me for, I believe, if I remember correctly, he took me for lunch twice. So the first lunch that he took me for, I barely said anything. I was still very, very short, still trying to understand everything. And then the second time he took me out for lunch, I at least could now start talking because I could tell that he was just trying to get me out of that comfort zone, right? I was not used to the environment I was. So that for me was very good. So I didn't really have any discriminating thing because I had someone who kind of showed me a better experience. So I would say I was one of the people that had good experience. I didn't really get that much because all the people I was with Nigerians, I was with Indians, I was with, I was at work, and at work it was very professional, and I had a director who actually wanted to help me. So even when I was going to leave this job later on, so after my school, I was opportune to just go back here to actually start a full-time job. So it was pretty very smooth for me on that front. And then by the time I was going to leave, I remember him saying, "Do you remember when you first came? And now you could even talk, but now you're you're the one talking everywhere." So that was a very good experience for me. So I wouldn't say I had any major discriminating thing. I did realize that a lot of people didn't really know a lot about Nigeria. I mean, if they probably knew, it's probably just knew Lagos, and that was it, right? So there wasn't so much. So I found myself even at work now, kind of explaining some of things that we face back home in Nigeria, like, we don't have this, we don't have that. This is what we have. This is how it is. So, just conversations here and there. I've been able to more of impact, not necessarily get people to say things to me. Yeah. So, I mean, there's two things I would say. First thing, I mean, when I came in, and after, having conversations with different Nigerian students, international students in the sense, I realized one thing, and this was very common amongst, undergraduate students. It was that even though the program was supposed to be 4 years, I found out a lot of them were already on the pathway to spending 5 years. And this is what I mean. So, first of all, I realized quickly that it's very easy here to change your program. This was something that was very new for me because back in Nigeria, just the stress of you being able to even change your program, seeing this person, this course advisor, that alone would deter any, idea of you wanting to change your program. But I realized that because of how easy it was, we had a lot of international students who would come in, start with the program, then later switch to another program, and again switch to another program. So rather than pushing through, sometimes they would just give in because it was pretty easy. They would just switch over to another thing right in the bat. And because of that, they were extending the amount of years they were going to spend in school. Also having the same resources, right? The same resources was going to be extended. So that was one thing I noticed. And that's something to watch out for as an international student because I know it's sometimes very hard to make up your mind on what exactly you want to do, but the system sometimes doesn't kind of put you in a spot where you have to just think of it and soldier it on. Like I said, when I was coming in here, I knew my program was for working professionals, but I knew I had no experience from anywhere. But like I said, we go rougher. I knew I was coming in, I was very determined. I'm like, no matter what it takes, I'm going to give it. Even though I knew it was supposed to be for working professionals. And that was what I did. So, but then I just found out that because a lot of the younger people, like, with undergraduates, they had not really had any experience with school. So it was like their first experience with school. So, I mean, why not change when it's easy? So that's the first thing I'll say. The other thing I noticed was because a lot of people coming into Canada, they have agents who help them with the applications. I realized that a lot of people didn't know nothing about immigration, about their status here in Canada. So there were a lot of a lot of students, not necessarily Nigerians, but I mean, because I was in the Nigerian community, I heard more stories about Nigerian international students. A lot of them, after school, didn't even know what next to do. They didn't know when to do it. Some of them didn't even know their papers were expired. Some of them didn't know the difference between a study permit and a regular temporary resident visa. So some of them, because their study permit is still good, they would travel out of the country, and then now they're stuck because they need a visa to come back into the country, even though their study permit was still good, right? People didn't understand the reason why, like, your passport expires this time, even though your study permit is not expired, but Canada would only give you up to when your passport is expired. Like, there's a lot of, even your work permits, like, there's a lot of things that cuts across that. So my advice really is research. The way and I noticed that the way the Canadian system works, everything, all the information you actually need is out there. Like, they have everything on their website. The challenge again is just that people don't want to spend the time doing the research, reading up on some of those things. And it's not bad to use an agent. There was even one thing I did when I was going to come here. After I'd done all the application, I'd gotten all my documents ready, just because I knew this was a one-time shot and I couldn't miss it. What I did was I went to look for an agent that had been doing this before. And I had a conversation with them. I negotiated and said, you know what, this is what I want you to help me do. Just help me check through the documents, just to make sure that I am actually doing the right thing. That's all I want you to do. And then when they did that, I just tipped them a very little fee, right? So I didn't pay an agent, but I knew the whole process. I sat down with them to actually upload the whole document. So I knew the whole process. So it wasn't tough for me when I was going to do my postgraduate work permit, when I needed to apply for, extension for my temporary resident visa, things like that. And all the way to my citizenship, I had applied for everything myself, did everything myself. So you can't run away from applications in Canada, really. So just get on it. Oh yeah. So my journey has has evolved, I would say. From an educational point of view, one thing that kind of happened, because of course I was done with my master's degree. I wasn't thinking of furthering my education in the sense, but of course there's still stuff to be done. The IT world, there's always certification to be done. So I've had a number of certifications that I've taken even since then. But one major one I'll talk about is I had tried applying to become an engineer, like a registered engineer in Alberta. And after I did my application, I submitted it, waited for about 6 months. I got back a letter saying that I was advised to go take the fundamentals of engineering exam, which was an exam that was going to test my knowledge from everything I did back from my undergraduate studies. So from my year 1 to my year 5, they wanted me to take an exam because they just wanted to validate my engineering degree from Nigeria. So that took me in a different direction, because how do you study for everything you've done since your year 1 to year 5 after you left school, like, 4 years or whatever that is? So that was a very interesting one for me. It was a very tough one, but I started writing that exam, and then I passed the exam. And of course, I became an engineer in training. And then, of course, with work experience, I was able to apply to become a professional engineer. So from a career perspective, I was able to apply and become a professional engineer in Alberta. Career-wise, it's been I would say it's been sweet. I've been able to transition from my first job, from a junior role to a mid role, now looking into a more senior role and all of those kind of things. So I've transitioned between companies. So it's been a very good experience, I would say. I'm married now, so I already started a family. So that's one thing that's also very, very I look back and I'm happy about. Just looking at how my journey started as an international student to career-wise, and then starting up a family. And then I would say the last thing that I've also been very much involved in of recent is I'm a real estate investor. So like I said at the beginning, that's one of the things I do on the side. And that has actually opened me up to different opportunities, essentially, because I've been able to integrate myself more into the community in Edmonton. And this is how Edmonton has become home, because, investing in Edmonton, in properties in Edmonton, meeting people, from the real estate community, actually seeing that, there are actually amazing people in Edmonton. So it's been from school, having really no external community, to actual having people that I can say, oh, these are actually my guys, within the community. So it's been a very good experience, I would say. Yeah, my advice, I will probably, speak to the parents first. We understand that, there's a lot of investment for you as a parent, sending your child to Canada, paying international fees. It's a lot, and we do appreciate you guys for doing that for us. But there's a lot that happens here in Canada that is not visible to our parents back home, just because we are the ones experiencing it as international students here. It is actually a lot to come over here. So what I would just say, is as much as you've believed that you've invested a lot, try as much as possible to kind of be flexible enough with, international students. And I find it much more rampant with the younger international students, who come here first for their, first year in school. That first year sometimes can be a little bit challenging because there's a lot of things they have to deal with, right? Adjusting to the system, understanding the culture, even the weather. The weather plays a lot on just the emotional part of their well-being. So, sometimes just with my experience and, speaking with a lot of students, I find that a lot of them, if they don't get it strong in their first year, sometimes they just go on a tangent. And sometimes it's very hard when, parents from back home are also, pushing a lot, trying to push them into a lot of things. So, it's just my advice that, parents are a little bit, try as much as possible to be supportive of your kids, of your children, even if they are not doing so well initially, like try and just show them that, you can actually do this. And one other thing is try as much as possible, especially for the younger ones, to incorporate them into a community. So depending on whatever culture, whatever country you're from, as an international parent, in quotes now, community actually plays a lot here in Canada as a student. And sometimes when you are not in a community, you feel isolated. And that can really change your trajectory of how your school life can be. So it's very important that their parents actually make sure that they hand over their children or their wards to someone or, a community. Mentorship is a very, very big thing here. I have had the opportunity to, mentor one or two students who had rough times in school. And it's really not rocket science, essentially, right? A lot of students just need someone to hold their hands. I had someone who could hold my hands through my career, like, getting into Canada as an international student, going through work and all of that. So I had someone who was able to hold my hand, and I could tell the difference, really. So that would be my advice for parents. And now for students who are coming into Canada, welcome to Canada. Canada is a land full of opportunities, but you have your own part to play as well. There's a lot of determination you need to have. You need to be very focused. Canada can throw you up and down. Everybody's journey in Canada is totally different from each other. So don't think that your journey is the worst, and don't think that your journey is the best. But experience your journey, because every experience you have in your journey in Canada here would shape how things work out for you. It could be a bad experience, it could be a good experience, but everything actually at the end still works together to make you a total man or a total lady in the sense. So you don't have to isolate yourself when you come to Canada. Understand the system. And I'm going to say that again, understand the system. Don't always let someone do everything for you. Try and be involved in the process of whatever it is that you're doing for yourself, right? Don't just pay someone to go do something and then you just run off. It's going to come back. You're going to figure out later that you can't run away from it. So try and see if you can get someone that can hold your hand. Make sure you are integrated into a community. Don't isolate yourself. Speak up. There's a slang we say in my Yoruba language. It's called soro soke. Soro soke. Speak up, and speak up on time. There's been a couple of students that I've met that they were going through something. School had told them to withdraw from school. They were having bad grades, and they never said anything until when it was like die minutes. And then we now had to look for how can we help this student back into school. So sometimes it's a little bit stressful when it gets to that die minute. But if you speak up on time, people are there. Canadians will help you. A lot of your community members will help you. So that would be my, final words to students.